Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Walsh. We have a great one for you, as always. And on the show today, we are informing you of some of the troubles happening right now with the AstraZeneca vaccine as it continues to face a fair bit of criticism and trouble on the open market. The vaccine was supposed to be the shot that dug the world out of the pandemic. It was a cheap, easy-to-administer dose that would not just protect citizens of wealthy nations, but also those in vulnerable countries. It was really a pretty cool story. We'll take a look at some of the challenges it may be facing right now and how legitimate those challenges are. Speaking of challenges, Joe Biden is a big one if he wants to get anything passed. It's called the filibuster. We'll take a look at some of the new movement we've seen from Joe Biden on how he could plan to sidestep the potentially damaging regulations and hamstrings on his policy agenda. Ryan Grimm breaking that down. And what it would mean in terms of Senate history for everybody. And also a new report from Ken Klippenstein in The Intercept talking about what white supremacists are up to as they are targeting cell towers and electronic communications. The police warn a very important story about the future of the threats that we face. Stay tuned for that on the show today. So we got a great one for you. It's Newsflash 496 as we continue the march to 500 episodes. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, so we start with AstraZeneca, a vaccine that, I personally felt very, very excited about, very confident about. Was one of the first vaccines to be made a kind of collaboration between Britain and, it was Britain's AstraZeneca company and University of Oxford. So AstraZeneca's coronavirus vaccine was supposed to be the shot that, again, dug the world out of the pandemic here. It's Washington Post reporting. Michael Birnbaum, Carolyn Johnson, and Lori McGinley. So instead the inoculation was a collaboration between the University of Oxford researchers and one of the world's biggest drug companies has been plagued with missteps as other vaccine rollouts gain speed. First, there was confusing basic science, then missed delivery targets, now a confidence-sapping pause in Europe, following reports of rare blood clots among a handful of vaccinated. So, if the stakes hadn't been so high, the AstraZeneca saga might have felt like a soap opera with the soaring moments of scientific brilliance being undercut by embarrassing mistakes. The Oxford team that developed the vaccine was bold, but also appeared arrogant to many scientists on both sides of the Atlantic. Had the rollout of the AstraZeneca vaccine been handled differently, it might have been available far more widely by now, blunting a new wave of death and disease that is threatening lives around the world. Countries have administered it widely, such as in Britain. Credit AstraZeneca with helping drive a dramatic drop in hospitalizations and deaths because of the kind of efficacy of the vaccine. Pretty much the biggest source of resistance that is faced because the kind of the cheaper vaccine, it's been very, very efficient for a very weak and kind of powerless central EU regulatory system because they kind of think that it's their whole responsibility to vaccinate all of the EU, and there's definitely a lot of flaws about the EU. It's definitely kind of a topic for another show. But, some of the biggest criticisms, the biggest problems were some of these missed delivery targets, which kind of comes out to do with the efficiency and the mass production that you would expect something like an AstraZeneca to have, funded by like the really kind of great minds of Oxford, but not quite working there in a big way. And a lot of talk made about the pause and whether the pause makes scientific or kind of logistical sense because of the fact that it is so rare. The blood clots that people have been having in some European countries have been paused in France, been paused in Germany. Now they're starting to back up, but the EU is still raising questions. It's been a bit of a brouhaha and a back and forth, but it's been pretty effective in a lot of different places. Britain, for example, credit AstraZeneca with helping drive a dramatic drop in hospitalizations and deaths, but the public confidence in the company's vaccine has just taken a major hit, slowing its acceptance and delaying the battle against the pandemic. And again, this is a situation where we're talking about the world over. It is already very, very hard to convince people to get and stay on these vaccines and really give them a good, solid chance. So that is something that we're going to following very, very closely, folks. But nowhere have the consequences been clearer than in Europe, which bet heavily on the AstraZeneca vaccine doses, but has received just a third of what it was promised. So that is a big, big flaw in the delivery. If they're not able to get that, if they're not able to figure out the logistics there, that is a big problem. So now many countries are shutting down yet again as the more contagious coronavirus variant first spotted in Britain races across the continent. Hungary broke records for deaths and cases on Friday. France imposed a strict new shutdown in much of the country. Germany's cases were up by 50% last week, and opinion polls suggest the public willingness to get an AstraZeneca vaccine is dropping. AstraZeneca is unfortunately underproduced and underdelivered, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen told reporters last week, and this painfully, of course, reduced the speed of our vaccination campaign. AstraZeneca feeling the heat. They declined to comment on the record for this article in the Washington Post, but pointed to a statement after the European regulators reaffirmed the vaccine safety last week following reviews of the reports of the blood clots. So, yeah, I mean, I think this is a fact that if you're looking at what's been actually said here and been actually reported, I think this fact certainly still stands. And it is that we are seeing, I think by and large, that this is a relatively safe vaccine, and we are seeing like the whatever risk there may be, and the whatever like quibbles, I think very fairly that you say about they have just not been able to get the vaccines out. A lot of that comes with their relationship with the EU. Britain, for example, has done this actually way more efficiently, kind of putting the EU style a bit to shame here, but yeah. AstraZeneca making the point that the analysis of the AstraZeneca's safety database on tens of millions of records for the vaccine did not show that these events occurred more commonly than would be expected in millions of people. That's what is in reference to the questions being raised in regards to the blood clots that have been appearing there. So really, the AstraZeneca vaccine served a wave of hype last spring. A front-page article in the New York Times declared that Oxford was really sprinting the fastest and had leaped ahead of everyone else. Oxford scientist Sarah Gilbert had said at the time she was 80% confident the vaccine would succeed before a single person had received a shot in a clinical trial. But from the beginning, the Oxford group was having one press release after another, bragging about how wonderful everything was. This, of course, creating a little bit of jealousy in the scientific community, says Hildegrund C.J. Ertel, a scientist who works on the same vaccine technology at the Worcester Institute in Philadelphia and has collaborated with Oxford scientists. Talking about something wonderful before you've shown it is completely counterproductive. It was a big PR disaster. Adrian Hill, a key member of the Oxford team that developed the vaccine, argued that the early communication on the shot was accurate and partly a response to Anthony Fauci, the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, who predicted coronavirus vaccine would be ready in 12 to 18 months. We disagreed. We said we'd shoot for September, and it'll be this year. And if that's boastful, I'm sorry, but that was right. Hill said in an interview, we're saying this could be done much faster, and they were able to get it done. The scientists framed their work as a global solution, a shot really not made for just rich nations. AstraZeneca said it would not seek profit on the doses it made. And by the way, you can do that. Like I think the dangerous thing here is we're associating the good motives that they had on making this a cheap shot, making this available to people who couldn't afford to pay for all the fans, like the Johnson & Johnson, first, like associating mistakes that they may have made with the vaccine and the rollout and the efficiency and the logistics of it. That is certainly one thing that you can do. But I think it's really going to be easy, and it's going to be a lot of fun, and it's going to be very, very beneficial for people like Washington Post and big Western media outlets for the narrative to be coming from people like the EU and the United States here that this silly little company AstraZeneca, they tried to do something. They tried to make their shots cheap, and if it's cheap, it's bad. Not because it's not bad because they didn't put enough effort. They didn't go through it thoroughly enough. They didn't put it out. They didn't meet their delivery targets. There's some flaws with the blood clots. The reason why that is because they made it too cheap and they made it available to everybody. They didn't go for the profit motive because this is just abnormal. No, like we got to be clear on the fact that these two things I think are mutually exclusive. Like you can they're two different things. They're separate from each other, and they are I think that's something that is important, that should be remembered. So in May, months before the rival vaccine makers Moderna and Pfizer-BioNTech launched their large clinical trials, Oxford and AstraZeneca announced they would test their vaccine in 10,000 people in Britain. Shortly after the United States announced it would spend up to $1.2 billion for 300 million doses from the company that would begin to be available in October, the biggest initial U.S. order for a vaccine. But before shots could be administered in the United States, AstraZeneca would need to be tested in a 30,000 person trial a choice scientists made to ensure that multiple American vaccine trials would be roughly comparable and large and diverse enough to adequately measure the safety and the efficacy of the vaccine in many groups of people, including older adults and groups hit hardest by the pandemic. And those trials wouldn't begin until the end of August. Even as they raced forward, they did hit some snags. Rare neurological symptoms occurred in 3 people, 2 of whom received doses of the study vaccine, causing trials to be suspended worldwide to explore whether those might have been caused by the vaccine. There was no evidence of a connection, but the pause went on for weeks in the United States, setting that trial back. So we've seen some pauses, kind of very similar to the ones that we've seen in the EU, but very recently. But none of these really have stuck. I think that's a thing that people are kind of ignoring a little bit in what weirds me out. But yeah, I don't know exactly why, because again, I'm not an expert on this, but it seems like, nothing really has stuck to the vaccine, but there seems to be a lot of innuendo here about how bad it is. So some of these participants in the British trial unexpectedly received a first dose only half as strong as initially planned, and the explanations about why it happened were confusing, contradictory, and slow to emerge. The problem appeared to be linked to an Italian subcontractor that used a different technique to measure the vaccine's active ingredient. And Hill said researchers received regulators' approval to give a new dose to trial recipients and insisted there was no mistake. After the dosing area was revealed, the AstraZeneca team gave different explanations. Andrew Pollard, one of the lead Oxford scientists, told the Washington Post, "It's framed as an error, but it's actually a scientific observation." The dosage issue later became a point of confusion when the company released trial results to the world in November. In the half-dose group, the efficacy of the vaccine shot up to 90% compared with 62% in volunteers who received the full 2-dose regimen. The Oxford scientists were frank that they couldn't explain why the unconventional dosing group had superior protection, and they're exploring explanation. So ultimately, it became clear that instead of a 4-week gap between the shots, some participants in the half-dose group had received the shots as much as 3 months apart, which could have explained the difference. So that's kind of some of the back and forth that they've had. It's a pretty good article here, but do your research again, just broadly about this AstraZeneca vaccine and all the vaccines before you take it. That's a little bit of a public service announcement before we move on to our next story. And here is another one. SWRN has so much going on to tell you about. We, of course, have to start with Newsflash. We continue to make the grind to our 500th episode. That'll be on Sunday the 28th with a big panel special bringing back some of your favorite Newsflash contributors. Until then, we'll be on the air, as always, every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday with that show. We start up our supplementary programming with a special all-new redesigned edition of Uncultured Design to highlight some of the most interesting parts of hip-hop, whether it be past or present. And, of course, we are working on that brand new season of Hidden History, continuing telling the stories we told in Season 1. Spencer Welsh Radio Network. Listen today on Spreaker.com/TSWS. All right, so, yeah, a lot of fun things. We're coming up in that 500th episode, and join us Tuesday. This is not going to be a Tuesday night late episode, but it's going to be coming out Tuesday at midnight. We'll put it out 12 o'clock Tuesday, the first minute of Tuesday, because we're going to be doing this interview tomorrow with Andy Cowles, our UK correspondent, is going to be back on the air reporting from London. That's going to be Tuesday. He's going to be giving you talk. He's going to be telling us about why the UK is kind of going to hell in a handbasket right now. I've been following UK politics, been very, very interesting, but really haven't been able to talk about it that much over here. Kind of been saving it, waiting for a moment to talk about it with someone who really does know a lot what they're talking about, even if we may not have the exact same opinions and everything. But yeah, I've really been following that Novara Media, I believe I mentioned it here on the show before, but that is the best UK media outlet I've come across by far. So shout out to them for that and all the great work that they do. But we hope to have a great conversation tomorrow. Looking forward to it. With Andy Callis from London. So it's going to be very, very fun to do that. Really, one of my favorite episodes I've ever done was actually when I had him on the last time. So it's going to be great to have him back. But we must continue on now with the rest of our show. So Joe Biden, we talked about the filibuster. We talked about how important it is. And Ryan Grimm here with a very interesting layout on what he thinks is going on and what the talking filibuster here could look like. He says, when President Joe Biden was first elected to the Senate in 1972, the filibuster was rarely deployed, and when it was, it could be beaten back by a 2/3 vote by the Senate. So that was pretty much his big thing, like his one of his biggest, most primal arguments was that, oh yeah, you can just beat it back with a filibuster. It wouldn't be effective, and this is something a bit like the defense of the Senate rules, and this is why there has been such a big push on Biden to get rid of all things filibuster here. So so pretty much the thing why the filibuster wasn't such a big deal back then was because it almost never happened, because politics, believe it or not, were quite different back then. And yeah, let's get into this a little bit more here and get into some of the history, because it is very interesting. And so yeah, Ryan Grimm writing here, because no one really wanted to sink legislation. And instead of the threat of filibuster would sink legislation, not because the majority couldn't overcome it, because they didn't want to waste a few weeks on it and had other business to get to, because that's actually a time when the Senate was kind of focused on like a little bit more productive than the just like snail's pace that it operates at now. In 1975, the rule was reformed to lower the threshold from 67 down to 60, though it was still rarely used. The Senate that Biden grew up in, remember he was 29 when he was elected, largely passed bills that, it's kind of insane that he was that young. He's this old now. Largely passed bills by a simple majority vote, including controversial bills. When the debate was over, even senators who opposed the underlying bills would vote yes on what's known as cloture, which means closure of the debate. That began to change, first with Harry Reid, the Senate Minority Leader, determined to fight President George W. Bush, but went into overdrive under Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who effectively raised the threshold for any legislation needed to 60 votes in order to undermine President Barack Obama. For someone like Joe Biden, that phenomenon, the legislation needs 60 votes to pass, not 50, in what should be at least some sort of kind of majoritarian Senate where the majority has at least some control. That has really been a new thing, and it's been super, super damaging to Democrats, and probably especially one Democrat that he kind of holds quite dear, and that is that is Barack Obama. So yeah, it is really kind of an interesting new thing. I mean, it is, and it is relatively new, and it's not really the beating heart of the Senate, as some people claim. It hasn't been there for so long. No one knows that better, perhaps, than Biden himself. He alluded to his old school credit in an interview with George Stephanopoulos, published Tuesday evening by ABC, where he said, quote, "I don't think that you have to eliminate the filibuster. You have to do what it used to be when I first got to the Senate back in the old days," Biden said. You had to stand up and command the floor. You had to keep talking. That's what he said. This talking filibuster, the idea of a talking filibuster, was pretty big for him. He said, "You're for bringing back the filibuster?" Stephanopoulos asked. "I am. That's what it was supposed to be." That's pretty much what he's saying. It's getting to the point where, democracy is having a hard time functioning. Notice that Biden is using the credibility he owns as a Senate traditionalist, as he was elected 6 years before Ryan Graham was even born, and I'm getting old, to make the case that reform is necessary and to defend democracy and return the Senate to the working condition it was when he got there. You got to tamp down on the filibuster at least a little bit. It's no secret that Biden was far from progressive first choice in the Democratic nomination, but he may possess a unique ability to disarm centrist and conservative Democrats who otherwise might oppose the same project if it was proposed by someone like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, or really anybody but Biden, who didn't have all that moderate credibility, which is pretty fair point, because he does have that certain, like, if Biden's opposing it, if Biden these like super ultra Senate traditionalist is supporting ending the filibuster, then what business do you have still sticking on that time? Senator Ted Cruz kind of laughably criticized Biden as boring but radical. There is some kind of truth if Cruz doesn't even really recognize a little bit. Here's how Biden can do it. No one really knows what the filibuster would look like with the new rules, because we don't have any firm conversations yet. But from conversation with Senate sources over the past few weeks, months, and years, Ryan Graham, he's going to take a few stabs at it. First of all, the 60-vote threshold for cloture has to go. That's one of the big things holding up passage of anything right now. The current rules puts the onus on the majority to marshal 60 votes, which no majority is likely to have for the foreseeable future. If Democrats do manage to reform the filibuster, you have to assume this much: they will not go through all that trouble to simply leave McConnell with a veto over their agenda. How they strip that veto remains to be seen, but the new rules would shift the onus from the majority, which today needs 60, to the minority, which today barely has to show up. As the Manchin says, you need to extract the cost from the minority to obstruct, to make them actually be there on the floor. Maybe it has to be more painful. Maybe you have to make them stand there, Manchin told Fox News earlier this month, which, by the way, he even walked back. It's like, oh no, that's too far. So if the cloture can stay at 60, how do you get to a place where a majority of can reasonably reach it? One solution is to deploy the present in voting approach. The possible rule goes like this: if 3/5 of the senators voting are senators present in voting support cloture, then cloture is invoked and the debate's over. Democrats who support the notion of cloture, 60 for cloture, could think of a 3/5 as a synonym. That would mean if all 50 Democratic senators showed up to at 3 a.m. to call the vote, Republicans would need 34 senators ready at any time and any point to vote no. They can do that sometimes, but eventually Democrats or any future majority would wear them down and kind of catch a moment where they would be sleeping, like literally in some cases, so they can't get to the floor in time to stop it. Another approach could be to require 41 votes to sustain a filibuster at any time. Under the current rules, if a cloture vote gets 59 yes and 0 no votes, the no votes still win. You could flip that to say, unless 41 senators insist that talking continue, the debate is over. And again, if that vote is called at 3 a.m., there may not be 41 senators able to get to that allotted time. Those are just some of the ways that you can kind of play a little bit with the strings of the Senate rules, president voting rules. What votes do you need to kind of maintain debate? Because it's all about, that cloture. How do you say we're ready to move on, we're past the talking stage, and we're ready to take this bill to the next level, whether the Republicans like it or not? That is the thing that Joe Biden is probably exploring to some degree right now. We now turn to an interesting situation going on with the security state. And what we're looking at there, we're looking at things very strongly with that, folks. And Ken Klippenstein has a bit of a report like that, and how white supremacists are getting in to cell towers. Let's get into it now. So as the Biden administration pretty much turns the attention to an infrastructure system beset with problems, a strange new issue has emerged: conspiracy theorists. That's according to a detailed intelligence report produced by the New York Police Department, obtained by The Intercept, which finds that cell phone towers and other critical infrastructure have become an attractive target for conspiracy theorists, especially in the weeks and months following the presidential election. Conspiracy theorists, joined by far-right white supremacist groups, increasingly target critical infrastructure to incite fear, disrupt essential services, and cause economic damage with the United States and abroad, the report said. Blaming the current contentious domestic political environment, the document, issued on January 20th by the NYPD Intelligence Bureau and marked as law enforcement sensitive, describes a rash of attacks, some of which involve strikingly sophisticated planning. So this is an excerpt from a January 2021. This is the intelligence report reproduced by The Intercept. In one case says, on December 14th, 2020, an individual or individuals broke into a cell phone tower ground station on Fairview, West Virginia, severing the tower's main power cable and removing the primary and backup generator batteries. The tower had provided wireless coverage throughout West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Maryland, and the damages totaled over $28,000. Like, that's pretty significant. In another instance, an unknown individual is said to have sneaked into a cell tower site in Tennessee on December 19, 2020 by cutting open its perimeter fence. The individual then severed the site's fiber optic cables and damaged several other telecommunications components, resulting in a significant disruption of service for approximately 12 hours. A third case describes a neo-Nazi chat group whose members strongly supported exploiting civil unrest in the United States by attacking the country's infrastructure. A member of the chat group, the report adds, wanted to pursue destruction where the system wouldn't be able to prepare for it, namely through attacks on U.S. bridges, railways, and electrical grids. So, that's some of the biggest things that we see. Like, they're really going through, and at least for some purpose, whether it's like kind of anti-5G crap or just state sentiment, they're going after the infrastructure here. So the Intelligence Bureau, which is responsible for gathering intelligence on terrorism and other criminal threats, blames these and similar attacks on individuals motivated by extremist conspiracy theories aimed at fomenting a general distrust of government and racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists. It stresses that the threat of white supremacists to infrastructure in particular. In recent months, white supremacists, extremists, neo-Nazis, far-right Telegram groups, and online conspiracy theorists have all emphasized attacking valuable and critical infrastructure targets like these cell tower points just to kind of cause chaos. Many far-right groups adhere to the accelerationist principle, which maintains that hastening the collapse of society will bring about political change. Targeting an infrastructure which impedes the state's ability to function is a common insurgency tactic used by militant groups worldwide. The most detailed cases depicted by, pretty much in the report is that of Anthony Quinn Warner, who carried out the bombing in front of the AT&T building in Nashville, Tennessee on December 25th, 2020, the largest vehicle-borne improvised explosive device attack since the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995. While Warner was not associated with any of the white supremacist groups, the report refers to initial accounts that Warner was paranoid about the 5G cellular networks, an important element which may take on greater significance given the apparent target. Of tactical significance, the report continues, is the fact that Warner included a pre-recorded audio warning that encouraged a passerby to evacuate the area, indicating a likely intent to cause structural damage rather than mass casualties. Similarly, the Department of Homeland Security's intelligence wing on January 5th and 6th issued 3 intelligence reports about vandals targeting cell towers in New York, West Virginia, and Tennessee, according to a document obtained by The Intercept. The attacks resulted in disruption of service, including to law enforcement and first responder communications. While reports about threats in infrastructure security are not uncommon, it was unusual to see 3 produced in a single week, a federal law enforcement official said, especially on and before that critical January 6th day of the Capitol riot. The official requested an anonymity to avoid some professional reprisal there. But I think the thing you're talking about is we are seeing a kind of very interesting and kind of disturbing trend of this kind of stochastic violence. And that is definitely a trend. But there is also an interesting dynamic of what do we do about it? What's the response here that we have to muster in order for proportionality's sake? Like, what is the smart response here? What are we going to do to kind of counteract this threat without getting in the way of civil liberties? And how serious is this threat? How much of a threat are just some random like neo-Nazis going around and taking out cell towers. Like, are we going to be really screwed over this? I personally do not know. And it's definitely going to be an interesting story to watch, though, to see how our government handles in response to this. Because one thing I think we know for sure is we should not give them the benefit of the doubt. We should always keep a close eye, and that is what we strive to do here at Newsflash. Thanks, though, to Ken Klipperstein there for that reporting. We love to follow what's going on with our national security state, don't we, folks? We love it. We love it. We really do. That is all we got for you today. We will be back Tuesday, early. Look for it. It's going to be there. Interview with Andy Cowles from London.